Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. My name is Arun Manoharan. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Public Service and Healthcare Administration at the Sawyer Business School at Suffolk University, Boston. I'm the director of the National Center for Public Performance, which is a research and public service center at the Sawyer Business School in Suffolk University in Boston. The NCPP, our center, is focused on improving performance in public and nonprofit organizations, and we serve as a forum for the study, dissemination, and recognition of performance management initiatives. Our main focus is to provide training and certificates in areas related to performance, communication, data-driven decision making, and also child welfare services. We were in the NCPP was started in the year 1974 by Professor Marc Holzer, who's the main guest today. And the center is internationally recognized for our commitment and contribution to the sharing and learning of best practices in performance measurement and improvement, and also to build a global network of professionals, practitioners, and scholars in public administration, public policy, and public affairs. So with this, I'm going to hand it over to our program manager, Stephanie Bensadoun, to introduce the speakers.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's Let's Talk Performance edition. My name is Stephanie Bensadoun. I'm NCPP's program manager. Here at NCPP, we strive to improve performance in public and nonprofit administration or organizations through research and education and building a global network of professionals, practitioners, scholars, and scholars in the public sector. I am thrilled to introduce our very special guest today. First up, we have our moderators, Katherine, Barrett, and Richard Greene, authors of The Promise and Pitfalls of Performance-Informed Management, and also principals at Barrett and Greene, Inc. And next is our speaker, Marc Holzer, author of Rethinking Public Administration. He is NCPP's founder and a distinguished research professor at Suffolk University. We are so excited to have them here today. At the end of this, we'll also have a Q&A, so feel free to send your questions in the chat throughout this conversation, and we'll make sure that they get answered. All right, let's get started.
Great. Well, thank you so much. It's really I must say it's an honor being here with Marc. We've been here with Marc in different places where the conferences and visits and over the course of a scary long amount of time. But it's particularly an honor today, having read his book, Rethinking Public Administration, which genuinely, we read a lot of books. And this is for depth and quantity of material and quality of material, it is remarkable that you could fit so much in such a skinny little book, because it's a remarkable book. When Katherine, we both read it in preparing for this, but we would have read anyhow. And when we started, Katherine, when she finished it, she said, "I think this is a masterpiece," and that's pretty good. And I guess, which leads me to maybe a good place to start, which is, Marc, what inspired you to do this particular book?
Well, thank you, Richard, and thank you, Katherine, for that question and for your quick reviews of the book. I guess what inspired me was sort of tracking the perceptions of the public sector of governance over a long period of time. So I first started studying public administration at Michigan in 1966, which seems like a very, very long time ago, probably is. And at that point, public administration was a well-developed field, with the first, the first program started at the Maxwell School of Syracuse, in the 1920s, and it looked like things were proceeding apace, and that we're, we had a competent sets of people entering the public service. The curriculum was well established, etc. Public service as a respected venue for employment, let's say, for spending your careers was very, was high the list then. But then over the years or the decades, we went from, a positive view of at least, federal services, around 1970 to, percentages in the 70s to what is now probably, well below 20%. We see it not only in the presidential, polls, but just polls of citizens. So I started asking myself, what are we missing? What do we need to do to turn this around? Because the trust in government is really the foundation of our democracy. It's really very important to a collective notion of society, of societal services, people helping, one another, or investing with one another. And, that just led me to think that there were some threads that we're missing, that maybe the media is capturing, or the humanities are capturing, or the business people are running away with, whatever. So I started just thinking about that. Yeah.
So when you talk about the threads, can you pinpoint kind of the main issues that you see that led us from where you started and how you perceive things back then to now?
Sure. One is that we are not doing a very good job of communicating with the public. We, meaning the public sector, public administration community. Part of that is that government is restrained by legislation, very often saying you can't deal with public relations, but you can deal with public information. And the public information that we put out there is more in the form of spreadsheets than it is in terms of stories. It's more in the form of just boring budget documents than it is in the data that shows that the investments in government pay off. So part of the problem is that government is sort of rolling over and playing dead along these lines and assuming that people know what's going on. For example, the investments that Biden has made in the economy generally, aren't touted very highly. They're just not, they're not being announced. They're not being branded. They're not being, communicated that way. So that's one, that's one element. Another is the business model, especially under Reagan. And the business model is something I blame Woodrow Wilson for, in a sense, for touting it in terms of, quote, the science of administration. But we need business skills. We need efficiency skills, if you want to call them business skills, in the public sector, certainly. But under Reagan, it became privatization, and I think he just elevated. He and his associates elevated this, and Steve Savas at Baruch became a proponent of privatization, and that that just reinforced this this feeling on the part of the public very often that, well, if you want to straighten out government, put somebody from the business sector in charge. That's usually a disaster. Reagan did it, the Bushes did it, and certainly Trump did it. So those are two things that were going on.
Can you pinpoint a little bit why this business model doesn't work? I mean, why people say government should operate like a business, and yet it really shouldn't. And I know you talked about this a bunch in your book.
Yeah. Okay. So it's a question of values to start with, and there's a saying that the public and private, organizational management are alike in all unimportant respects. Right? which emanated from Columbia University, I mean, that's true. In the public sector, what we're trying to do is invest in people, invest in services, invest in business, whatever. But the returns aren't coming back to government in a sense, in a tangible way. In the private sector, the value is make money, buy low, sell high. Sense. Okay. Now, what that means is that if you privatize government, you run the risk of the services being narrowed, so that the more profitable customers, if you will, become the target for the privatized agencies. Right. Yeah, that's one problem. But then the services get narrowed as well, because the private organization wants to make a profit and wants to maximize the profit, and the people working there are rewarded for making that profit. So takes away. So if you look at water systems, for example, sometimes some of them are privatized, and the quality of the water becomes dubious. So in Massachusetts, the Berkshires, for example, there's a privatized water system in Housatonic, which has been in effect shut down because it's dangerous. In other places that that has happened as well, or water gets in the water example again, water could be diverted to other profitable things, even the export of water in some sense, given what's happening around the world. So that's something government would never do, right? But it's this whole notion that on the private side, you can pick and choose your customers, or at least narrow it down to where you are getting the most profit. On the government side, we're supposed to serve everyone. That's the objective. We're trying to elevate the quality of life for everyone. But that's a different ethic, if you will, than what you have on the private side.
Is it your impression that a great many stakeholders in government, which includes everybody, one way or another, that a great many stakeholders believe that government can run like a business because they don't understand that government does a lot of things that no business could ever make a profit doing?
Yeah, that's part of it, certainly. That they don't understand that, let's say government in terms of school systems is serving, an awful lot of kids with disabilities. If you want to use that term, kids who need extra investments, who need attention, who need smaller classes. That doesn't work, in terms of their perception. They just don't understand that government is the avenue of investment in people. But there's this myth which is reinforced by the media. It's reinforced by the Sunday comics. It's it's reinforced in movies and novels, whatever, that you just need to put somebody from the business side in charge, or from the military. So we've seen generals put in charge of school systems, which is an abject failure. We've seen business people put in charge of human resources or universities, whatever, which is often a very difficult situation for them. And I think what you often find is that people who are, quote, captains of industry find that the hardest job they ever had is a job they may have taken in government as a cabinet official or a commissioner or something, something like that. In effect, Richard, they don't understand the whole toolbox, if you will, the competencies you need in order to really run an organization in the public sector. It's much more complex than it is in the private sector, right? So Elon Musk can, come with a couple of good ideas, like Tesla, that's not, even though it's technology, it's a lot simpler than trying to run a public school, than trying to, run a human resources department, than trying to run an environmental, organization. And in part because the stakeholders are much broader when you're dealing with a public organization than they are in a private organization. Private organization, you were essentially dealing with the customers, and you were dealing with the investors or the stockholders, the board. In the public sector, you were dealing with countless stakeholders, and that direct and indirect. So they're the obvious stakeholders that you have to deal with to begin with, but then with the ones who are indirectly affected. What happens when you reroute a highway, and maybe you're shut down a town, in a sense. What happens if you're dealing with disposal of nuclear or other waste, or just plain garbage, and you export it somewhere to another state, or even to China. So what, where are your stakeholders? You have to take a very broad view of that. So,
and to what extent,
it's a tougher job. Yeah.
To what extent do you think this misapprehension that you describe has blossomed is as a result of the fact that a CEO of a big giant company makes more than the GDP of most communities in America?
Right.
So if you tell me that somebody is worth $50 million a year, he must be smarter than any governor.
No, his value, his or her values are different. So they've found a place where they can maximize their income, but they're not maximizing their value to society. So, on the other hand, you have people who work for very little. Let's say school principals.
I want to come back to the whole issue of communication, because it feels like a lot of what you're talking about is that somehow government hasn't been able to communicate what it does, why it's doing it, what its issues are, why it's so complex. If it did this so much better, kind of in the old days, not that old, but when you first started, what has failed in terms of the communication? And is it also, you were talking earlier about the federal level. Do you see the same problems at the state and local level too?
First of all, I'm not sure the communication was ever that good. I think the assumptions about government, in the US, let's say 50 or 100, 150 years ago, were much different. That people depended more on government, particularly in the, when the Industrial Revolution came along. They needed infrastructure, and they saw government building that infrastructure, much of which is still around. They saw public school systems being built, water systems being built, human resource systems. Well, let's say the city of New York, City University, it was a magnificent undertaking. Or public schools that were open to everybody. Certain different. So that sort of in a way spoke for itself, that people would get their needs were met. But then I think what's happened is that we never developed the ability to tell the stories we should, or the the capacity to tell those stories. And now, look what's happened with social media, with the internet and everything else. YouTube. Okay, so where are the stories about government that are out there? It's hard to find, the sense. I don't think that the political officials, the politicians, are really communicating those stories or those vignettes in a way. I don't think, certainly the middle managers aren't doing that. And the media has a bent towards finding out where the problems are, right? Plus, if there are problems that are generated by the behavior of elected officials, such as George Santos, let's say, New York, and there's the public workforce seems to get blamed for that. It's like public official indicted, so. So we don't really have enough of the capability to defend ourselves or to advocate for ourselves. And look at the curriculum and the MPA and MPP program. Okay, where is there a course on storytelling? Where is there a course on let's say in terms of measurement? How to construct visuals so that that stakeholders, public, some of many of whom pretty basic in terms of their grasp of the numbers, but can read pretty good at reading graphs and trends. Where are the models for that? We're not teaching that enough, and we just are not developing or using the tools for advocacy.
So that sounds like one of the potential solutions is really to reform public administration courses and curriculum so that those things are taught. Mm-hmm. Is that what you see is a kind of a fundamental part of the issue right now?
Yes, exactly. But it's not just public administration curricula. So I think what we need is to say, okay, we need to somehow organize so we can advocate for civics courses to start with, which are missing. They've been missing for a long time, right? Because I think they're more important than the some of the technical stuff, or they're just as important. Then you need majors in public service at undergraduate level, and the book, it's a curriculum in there for that. So people will actually consider, working in the public sector, putting, their careers in the public sector, rather than just, work for a consulting company or working, someplace where they can just run the numbers, a finance company on, Wall Street, for example. So that's, and then at the graduate level, you need to update the curriculum. The curriculum, the MPA programs hasn't changed very much, or in decades, and there's been some changes, but it's nothing, nothing that great. So people graduate and they don't have all of those skills that might be built in, and essentially they don't have all the competencies you need to run a complex public organization. The competencies are well defined out there. That's in the book. Let's say the Certified Public Manager program, which is in 30 states, but has very limited enrollments. And I used to run one in New Jersey. when I was at the School of Public Affairs Administration. So we need to teach those competencies, because a lot of people have only part of what they need to run it. And then we need, beyond the curriculum, I think we need to somehow get legislative approval state by state to require anybody who's running a public organization to have achieved some, training in the competencies they need. And the competencies are, there are dozens and scores of ways of defining these these competencies, but somehow we need to be able to equip them with these, so that it's clear that complex organizations are being run by people who have an understanding of the complexities of the organization and have the skills necessary to make the interventions that the organizations need and provide that leadership. But so there are multiple ways to do this, but we're not doing it.
Is there a way of kind of pinpointing what competencies are missing? And when you're talking about competencies, can you kind of be more specific?
So let's say, let me just reference it from the book in a second. So, okay, so there's what I call executive leadership competencies. All right, so there are personal fundamentals such as interpersonal skills or integrity, honesty, communications with skills. There are skills you need in competencies in terms of leading change. You have to understand creativity and innovation, and why it's often bottom up. And you need an awareness of the environment, and the eyes in the back of your head kind of thing. But you need, flexibility and situational leadership, awareness, resilience, and you have to understand the vision and mission, relationships and strategic thinking and strategic management, the kind of that John Bryson talks about, and organizational change. The third, you need competencies in terms of leadership, so you can help build teams. You respect and include, diversity. You can deal with conflict. This is what university presidents need these days. Let's say just one, Harvard, MIT, etc. Given the situations they have, you need to be able to help other people develop and motivate them. You need results-driven competencies, which is, it leads us to performance management and performance, measurement, but also in terms of accountability and decisiveness, customer service, entrepreneurship, such, and then fifth, you need to understand how the organization has to be process driven. So what, can you master problem solving techniques, decision making? Do you have technical credibility, let's say? So you're not just relying on experts in the organization who may or may not tell you everything that's going on. You need to understand project management. And then six, you need resource acumen. And the resources are not just financial. So there's the budget and financial management. Every MPA program has a course on that. But you also, you need to say, what is the human capital side of this? Because much of what an organization does is dependent on human capital without, piecework in a sense, and for innovation. And then there's, technology management, which is increasingly important as a resource. And finally, there's building coalitions. within and outside the organization. So are you politically savvy, let's say, or, maybe naive? Do you have organizational awareness, and can you negotiate? Can you influence? Can you mobilize support? So that's one menu, which is a meta framework that's built on research that I did with one of my doctoral students, Greene, several years ago. But so that's the kind of menu that's out there.
Given the earlier part of the conversation, it kind of surprises me that one of the items not on the menu is storytelling. That kind of feels to me like the beverage.
Well, it's hidden in there under communication somewhere, but yeah, I think there's probably an eighth cluster we need, which is the arts and humanities, because they're very good at sending us messages. We're not so good at listening to the messages. Sense of what's, generally the messages are what's wrong. But sometimes the messages are, this is what's right. Particularly the shows on, TV shows on criminal justice, law and order, whatever. Sometimes shows on education, whatever. But the arts and humanities are good at storytelling. And generally it's on the negative side in the traditional, but there are many cases where it's on the positive side, and those are models we can use. But but we're not. I think it'd be great if we got authors and directors and people like Spielberg into the classroom to say, this is how you get your message across. But that's a whole alliance that we're really not touching on, because there's silos. The arts and humanities people are off on one side, we're off on the other, and there are also biases that they don't think that the bureaucrats, the people who study bureaucracy, necessarily they're they're partners in a way. So they're in a little different place.
So I'm going to ask you to theorize. Our life is surrounded with an effort to, or surrounds an effort to help government officials communicate to a broader audience. It has become, over the course of the last 10, 15 years, increasingly difficult to get anybody on the phone anymore. The public information officers, who many of whom are terrific, but many of whom seem to have been put in a position to protect rather than to reach out. Why do you think that is? I mean, given the common sense of exactly what you're saying, is that if you want the citizenry to understand what government does and to appreciate it, and to be willing to maybe spend a few more dollars in taxes if it's going to give them value that they want, why are we protecting our public officials, and not just elected officials, but the folks who are really doing the heavy lifting, the folks out there who are heading departments, who now you can spend 3 weeks trying to get them on the telephone, and then maybe they'll talk to you. And these are people, I mean, we've been at this for 35 years. These are people who know who we are, but it's hard reaching them now.
Rich, I think they've hunkered down. I think they're in, somewhat of a bunker mentality. And they've been taking a beating, and they're afraid their budgets are going to get cut, and they're going to lose their jobs, or they're going to lose their resources, whatever. So, I mean, from my perspective, what it is that they simply, are in a defensive posture, and so they won't talk to you. I think they're afraid if anybody from the press calls up, that they're going to have to deal with some sort of accusations or scandal or whatever, and then they see what goes, what goes on in Washington or the state legislatures in terms of targeting them, for cutbacks, in a way. So I think that's the psychology of what's happening, since they're just defensive.
Yeah. Well, do you see a way forward from that?
Yeah.
Not to depress everybody here, but
I think
what's the positive outcome here?
Look, I think we could underscore the achievements of the public sector. Say government is your best investment. Yeah. Now, for example, you could say in terms of improving performance, that we haven't gone far enough, that we have measures, we have data that, this identifies problems, but how do you solve the problems? How do you improve the organizations? So it's not sufficient just to have a performance meeting and say, well, this has to improve, or we have to lower this error rate, or whatever. You have to find models out there. So one of the things we are not doing, which we could easily do, is find the best practices. And we could, we could say, okay, here is a database of best practices, a huge database, hopefully, because there are thousands and thousands that are validated every year by awards programs and all. So you can say, okay, here's one set of tools you could use. I say we're going to we're going to seek out the best practices, and we're going to then change our organizations accordingly. And the best practices could be the next city, the next state, or it could be around the world. Let's say another thing we can do is we could publish stories. So ASPA has started trying to do this a little bit, and ran out of steam on it a few years ago. I think other organizations do it a little bit, but one of the things I'm trying to do is found a virtual museum of public service, which could bring these stories of success and individual stories of sacrifice, success to the surface, and instill that into the curriculum. So we'll launch a virtual museum of public service in May with Public Service Recognition Week, let's say, and we'll have stories in there, things like how were terrible diseases prevented from coming to the United States? Well, by the public bureaucrats, if you will, right? That that public health is our first line of defense. Much more than the Defense Department, frankly. So you could do that, but you can also come up with lots of stories of sacrifice and surprising achievements and such. So a virtual museum, could be that. Another way to do this is we need a dialogue between the people who are the best storytellers and people in the public sector, or at least in teaching public administration, public policy, whatever. So we need to have that kind of dialogue in our universities. We're not doing that. We don't have links within the universities on an interdepartmental basis to make this to enliven the curriculum, let's say. So that's another way. I think we could do it. So those are three possibilities. I think that we need to do that so that we can rebuild public trust. Because with public trust, if we could start reversing the decline in public trust in government, then we could, I think, convince people to make more resources available through their taxes or fees or whatever, to make things happen in government. We need some resources to play with, in a sense, to experiment with. So those are a few ideas. So are there any questions, Stephanie? Or?
Yes, it looks like Rich and Catherine may have accidentally dropped off. But there are questions. So I got a couple of questions in the chat. So how do you see the field of public administration in the age of AI changing?
Um,
Or evolving?
I think that it's a very, it complicates the environment. It complicates the ability to deliver services. But I think that we have people such as Alan Shark, the head of the Public Technology Institute, who are addressing these issues. I think that AI is something that the public sector is going to have to regulate if that's possible at all. Though it may just get away from may take off on its own. But we have people in the public sector, looking at this and suggesting changes. I think what we have to make sure is that we're not eliminating jobs, in government, but that we're maybe redeploying resources. I think AI could probably help. Probably help address a lot of the routine problems we have in government. And then I think the public workforce is frankly very smart. I think it's, but those people have not always had an opportunity to come forth with their suggestions, with their innovations. I think they're close to what's happening in terms of the workforce, but nobody's asking them what to do. So that they might be freed up actually to do some more complex problem solving and deal with the human problems of all the government systems that we have without being bogged down by the routine stuff, which I think AI could probably help with, or AI could come up with maybe some new solutions. The problem also is who's asking the questions of AI, right? So if it's a very simplistic question, like, how do you make government more, how do you do away with waste in government? I think you get some ridiculous answers out of it, AI. But if it's a more complex question, like, what can you do to what can cities do to suppress drug use, or maybe the most complex, homelessness? What are possible approaches to dramatically reducing homelessness, which I think is a national embarrassment in a way. So I'd put AI to work on that, because I don't think we've necessarily been making a lot of progress on it. So I would look, AI is out there, you're not going to stop it. I would welcome it as a problem-solving partner, but not as a way to reduce the workforce.
Yeah, thank you. And I just want to say for everybody on the call, I've been getting some questions directly, but feel free to send questions directly to me. Feel free to just put them in the chat for everyone, and feel free to, raise your hand if you want to hop on and ask it yourself. Another question I received is, how can the average person get more involved in public administration?
Well, I think we need to approach public administration with a broad definition of who is actually providing public services. So let's say that in the US we have something like 20 or 22 million people working directly in the public sector. But beyond that, we have people who are working as contractors, not for profit or for profit with the public sector. I think that easily gets us up to 30 million. I think we have millions of people who are working as volunteers with public organizations, particularly at the local level, and they should be considered as public servants. And they should be part of the dialogues. They have a stake in the public sector. I think the media, the investigative reporting is really part of public service, and we need to acknowledge that as such. And there were awards for investigative reporting that really recognize that. I think foundations are part of public service, and we're not talking to them in terms of their contributions and their perspective on public service, and they're trying to solve problems that maybe we're not making enough progress on in government sense. So
Yeah.
Volunteers, the media, foundations, all in all, I think we're a much larger community than we give ourselves credit for. That the ethical public service really extends over those organizations, those groupings. In a way, if we did that, we'd be building, much more support for government. Government is sort of like the focal point for all of this. But then we have this whole array of other, groupings of other, organizations, and even people who are writing about public services and how to improve them on the business side. I think can be recruited. So if we did that, if we had a much larger network and a much more dynamic dialogue going on, I think it would be a win-win-win, etc.
Yes.
Environment.
We have another two-part question that came in. In numerous human service domains, mandated collaboration is frequently encountered, requiring involuntary cooperation with government, nonprofit, or private sectors due to policy or funding requirements. How do you see the evaluation of performance in this context varying from that in a voluntary setting of collaboration?
That was a question that, okay, so if you're mandated to cooperate versus voluntary cooperation, right? It's I think you have to bring the same skill set to bear along these lines, even if it's a mandated cooperation. There are many opportunities for good things to come out of that. Whereas if but you might want to resist it. It's you might be annoyed by it, but I think if it's mandated and even if the potential partners are somewhat reluctant to work with you or have they're skeptical, there's still opportunities to do things. If you were doing something on a cooperative basis, you still have to go through the same problem solving routines and assessment of whether your partners contributing or whether you have the full spectrum of partners or stakeholders you need to carry something out, carry out some initiative away. So I don't see much difference between it. It's good you need to cooperate.
Yeah, and so the second part of this question from an attendee is similarly, when incorporating the nonprofit sector into the delivery of public services, how do you perceive perspectives on performance differing from those in public-private partnerships?
Probably not much difference. I think public-private partnerships have a terrific amount of potential that that we don't necessarily pay attention to. So there is a growing literature on public-private partnerships. One of my students, Seth Grossman, was at the cutting edge of that. I think they have a high payoff value, and I think cooperation with nonprofits has a high payoff value. And I think time you can build partnerships in terms of what your mandated deliverables are, then I think you're in a much stronger position. And by the way, one of the things that we overlook, which I think partnerships or coalition can help, is that we're not just going through the routine of trying to increase our efficiency by 1 or 2 or 3% a year. In a sense, what we're really doing is we are elevating people's lives. So the measurement is not so much an efficiency measurement of value, but it's a measurement of the achievements we're making in people's health, let's say, free from pain, free from disease, in people's education at all levels, and people's ability to express themselves in many ways, such as the arts, whatever. So we're really, the public is really the catalyst to all of that, and partnerships with public entities or private entities, whatever, all can help us do that.
Thank you. We have 2 more questions before ending. The first one from someone says, how might the MPA curriculum contribute to enhancing public trust in government?
I would think that if the curriculum had a course that was focused on what I call delivering as promised, I think that would remind us all that the public sector is there to deliver on the promises in our foundational documents. So you can start, lots of different documents, but you have, the Declaration of Independence, on and on. You have the Constitution, you have the laws, you have the regulations, you have the statements that are made by presidents at their inaugurations, etc. So there are promises that have been made to the public. The bureaucracy, is the instrument for delivering on those promises, and the bureaucracy deserves much more credit for actually having those things happen. And compared to the rest of the world, we're doing a damn good job. But I think we have to focus on the fact that this is just not routine. This is just not going through the motions of going to work every day, doing as little as possible, sense, which is the prototypical image of the bureaucrat in the comics, etc. But that millions of people are at work delivering on government's promises, improving the quality of our lives, and, looking out for our safety, like looking at helping us develop in terms of our potential, etc. That's the link that needs to be made. Here's the statement that's been made on, generally in writing, so somewhere over the last 250 years in this country. Here's the instrument for delivering on those promises, And here is the data showing that it actually happened. That would be surprising. We need to come up with surprising relationships and facts that would attract attention out there, because we're competing. We're competing for space, let's say, in terms of the public's attention, but we're not competing very well. So I think we need to somehow, orient ourselves to do it. And the place to start is in the curriculum. And I think as broadly as possible in terms of public service and not just public administration or public management.
Thank you. Our very last question is, what makes you hopeful about public service and performance? The future of public administration.
I think that many more students are interested in public service. I think there's been a trend in that direction, and we have to take advantage of it. I think that people dedicate their lives to this, and I think they are models for others. So I'm optimistic can do it. I'm also optimistic that we have the human resources within the field to do it, and that we have an alliance between practitioners and academics that can be expanded. I mean, so the Public Administration Society is really built on that, that alliance, but we also, we need to build other alliances between public administration and the arts and humanities, which I've been trying to speak about that for a long time, but I think we haven't figured out exactly how to do that enough. But between public administration and the business community, between public administration and the public health, community, because they're very much alike. That we're all trying to solve the same kinds of problems. So let's say the humanities are critiquing what we do without, really what the solutions are, and we're just not paying enough attention. That's the dialogue we can open up. The business dialogue, we can try to educate the business community as to the full range of competencies that are necessary, for example. So I think that there are a lot of things we can do, and frankly, we can do without much money. Right? So even if the budget goes south, something, there are opportunities for us to build alliances, because most of the resources you need to do are human resources. It's not that you need money to do it. Do a lot of things. But with human resources, I think we can do a lot of creative improvements. But I'll just go back and say that what we're doing in terms of public administration is delivering on government's promises, and we're doing that especially, in terms of performance, which is a broader view of what's happening than of what we're accomplishing than just the efficiency emphasis that was apparent, 100 years ago in public administration, that is carried forward in a sense. So we have the framework, we have the structure, we have the commitment, we have the human resources to do it, and I think we're getting more recruits in terms of people who want to do something meaningful with their life, and the public sector is the place to do it. So I'm optimistic that way.
Thank you. I think we're all coming out of this on a hopeful note. Well, thank you so much, Marc, and thank you, Rich and Katherine.
Thank you all for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you so much. If any of you want to read Marc's book, it is called Rethinking Public Administration. If you want to read Katherine and Rich his book. It's called The Promises and Pitfalls of Performance-Informed Management. We will be sending out both of those links. And thank you all for joining. Please, we'll let you know when our next Let's Talk Performance happens, and feel free to be in touch if you want to learn more about NCPP's work. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thanks, Rich.